Good evening. Welcome to the Cambridge Community Conversation. It is Wednesday, September 30th, 2020. And this is the Cambridge Community Conversation for Dorchester Goes Purple. We came to you the first part of the month. We talked about some things. We're coming back to you here in the last part of the month. I'd like to thank you for joining us live tonight, taking the time to watch us either live or watching the recording about Dorchester Goes Purple. Before I introduce our topics and our guests, I'd like to thank the sponsors of the Cambridge Community Conversations program. Those sponsors include WHCP Community Radio, the Cambridge Association of Neighborhoods, the Dorchester Banner, the Dorchester Star, and the Dorchester Chamber of Commerce. My name is Bill Jones. I'm the state's attorney for Dorchester County, and I have the privilege of moderating this panel tonight. Just as a reminder, you're able to ask questions using the chat and comment feature on either YouTube or Facebook, however which way you're watching it tonight. If we are unable to get to your questions tonight, we'll certainly take that information and try to push the answers to those questions back out there. I'd encourage you to use that chat feature, ask any questions you can, and we'll certainly try to get to them as best we can. Now, at the beginning of the month, we kicked off Dorchester Goes Purple with an insightful conversation with our sheriff, James Phillips. We also heard from Angela Grove, the Health Education Program Manager for the Dorchester County Health Department, and Bob Willey, who is a local parent who lost a child to addiction along with his wife, Lori. If you recall, that was a powerful and generous story. And I say generous in the sense that he gave us his time, his attention, and it was an incredibly powerful and helpful thing that he shared with us. If you've not had a chance to view that broadcast, I would encourage you to look for it. It's still available on the WHCP Facebook page or via a link from the events page on the Dorchester Goes Purple website. There was really a lot of valuable information that was shared that night to explain why we need Dorchester Goes Purple, sort of its history, and why it's become even more important during this pandemic that we were all experiencing. Now, when I mentioned our last conversation, if you will, at the beginning of the month, you may have noticed that we really talked about prevention and enforcement. And one of the things that I said a long time ago when this opioid crisis hit us was that as the state's attorney, I tried to identify this problem in its pieces so that we could sort of go after all of these pieces, if you will. As the state's attorney, my prosecutors, my staff, and I, we have a chance to be involved with all of these community partners. And one of the things that we see is that we have a chance to be involved in the lives of people in various stages. And as such, we sort of view ourselves as the hub on a wheel with all these spokes that we come out and work with. And as part of that, we broke this problem down into a prevention piece. I'm big on prevention. Every case is easiest to treat if we don't have to treat it at all. And so we try to invest heavily on the prevention side of things. There's an enforcement piece. We try to cut off the supply. We understand that cutting off supply is not everything. Demand's a big part of it. But cutting off that supply as best we can, keeping those most dangerous substances off of our streets is a really important thing. And so we've tried to do that as well. For my part, we've not talked about that as much, but there's a prosecution piece to this. We try to take those people who would sort of peddle these substances, the drug dealers, and do the best we can to remove them from the streets of Cambridge, Dorchester County, and try to disincentivize that. And so we try to pay special attention to those people, particularly the ones who are distributing opioids among our citizens in our community. As well, in addition to that, there's a treatment piece, and we're going to talk about some of that tonight as well. And so we really try to focus on this problem in the various pieces. And tonight we're going to get a little more into the treatment end of things. The first time we talked more about the prevention and the enforcement piece of this, if you will. So as part of that tonight, we're going to explore outcomes. We're going to talk about sources for support, providing more details on how you can engage beyond purple. Look, we know that we can't prevent, or we're not likely to prevent, every single case out there. And so we have to understand that people are in need. And the purpose of tonight's program is to try to explain what's out there and explain to people how they can get to those various resources that are available to them. We have tonight a great panel of experts, and I'm confident they will provide you a great deal of information. Tonight we have Emma Diaz and Ashley Benson from Vision Quest Morning Star Youth Academy, and Catherine Dilley of Midshore Behavioral Health. Now, Before I introduce our guests for their insight, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to again review why we feel that Dorchester Goes Purple is so important here and why it's more than just a month. It's not just a month of September. It's not just purple lights. It's not just a slogan. At our first session, Angela talked about some of the staggering statistics that we have here, right here in Dorchester County, involving the overdoses and the deaths locally across the state. She talked about the number of young people engaging in dangerous behaviors, sometimes that didn't seem that dangerous, but sort of quickly evolve into more dangerous behaviors. And these behaviors that cause these young people to find themselves in states of addiction. Angela talked about the rise in the numbers since the pandemic started. The pandemic has created problems unto itself, but it's also taken existing problems and made them even more prevalent and severe than they were before. You also heard from Bob about the impact that this type of thing can have on a family, and particularly, and sadly in his case, about the impact on a family after an overdose death. I can tell you, and I sort of beat these drums sometimes, but I see it every day in the courts. The judges see it. Judge Hughes, Judge Wilson see these things in the courts every day. We see the families there that are trying to help their loved ones, trying to work through these problems. And we as a community have come together to try to do that. And it's prevalent, and I see it every day. The problem is widespread. There's no race that's impacted more than other, no religion, sex, gender, money or not. It doesn't matter who you are. You can be affected by this either directly or indirectly in terms of the impact on your family, friends, coworkers, something like that. One of the things that we talked about last week, at the beginning of the month, was why are we talking more about this now? There were some questions about, when cocaine and crack cocaine became a problem. And quite frankly, the reason it became a bigger issue for public health, law enforcement, and all of these various partners who are involved in these things is because of the overdoses. The opioid overdoses are a real thing. The number of people that we lose here is staggering. I can tell you this year is a much worse year for us than last year, and we think that the pandemic certainly has a great impact on that. So that's why it's getting the attention. It can hit anybody, and there's a lot of denial out there. A lot of people who would say, it's not going to happen to me. And I can tell you, as a father of four, personally, I worried, raising my children, because I've seen so many good families who are seemingly doing everything right suddenly find this within their home. It could be adult children, their younger children. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do. It can impact you. And just the way it scared me, it worried me, it should probably worry all of us. And we also have to worry about the stigma that's attached to that. Society is a funny thing. We unfortunately attach these stigmas to certain things, and unfortunately, substance abuse and addiction is one of those things. And if we are really going to help people and help them get to what is necessary to make their lives better, to turn them around, to find a situation where they are not dependent on these substances, then removing that stigma is an incredibly important thing that we're going to have to do. And so tonight, we're really hoping to be able to talk about some of these things that are helpful, so that people do not feel stigmatized and they know where they can go to find the help that they need. We need to really get this message out there and make sure that people understand that as a threshold issue, education and awareness are the best things. Because remember, I said a moment ago that I would rather dump all of the resources into prevention if that would take care and prevent of all these problems, because treatment is difficult. It's hard. You'll hear from the treatment professionals tonight. It's effective, but it's not easy. I would much rather prevent any case that we are potentially able to do. So we're going to try to get the word out, get words to you, to your loved ones, to find out that we, as a society, we understand that people who find themselves in the throes of addiction are not bad people. You heard stories earlier in the month about people who had gone to the dentist or had a car accident and were lawfully prescribed painkillers. And next thing you know, it snowballs and someone has a problem where they can't get off of it fast enough. It doesn't matter who you are. It just should not be stigmatized. The hope in all of this Dorchester Goes Purple is, if we can save one person and one family from the pain of addiction, then all of this is worthwhile, and we'll keep doing it. So we're hoping that tonight's session is one where you have a chance to learn a little more about what's out there, and maybe you can help save someone's life. So with that, I'm going to bring up our guests tonight, and I'm going to introduce the three of them together briefly, just so they can sort of give us a quick hi. And then we'll move on with our program. So with us, we have Emma Diaz, who's the program administrator for Vision Quest Morningstar Youth Academy here in Wolford. Did you wave, Emma? There we go. We have Ashley Benson, also from Vision Quest Morningstar Youth Academy. She's an addictions counselor there. Ashley, welcome. And then we have Katie Dilley, the executive director of Midshore Behavioral Health.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. I appreciate all three of you taking your time out of your busy schedules to come and do this very important work and help us get some of these messages out to the public. So with that, we're going to start with Emma and Ashley. Now, you'll notice that Emma and Ashley are sitting together. That's part of the logistics here. And because they work together, we wanted them to appear together. And I can tell you that they came in with their face coverings on. They've worn their face coverings while here in the studios, and they take them off just before now. We feel that, and they feel that they're safe to do that because they work together. They work together in close proximity every day. And they're sort of like family members, like you go at home. You go at home, you take your face covering off, you know who you're around, and you can feel safe to do that. So with that, I'd like to thank Ashley and Emma for being here. And we're going to start talking about the impact on youth. So Emma and Ashley, before we jump into the questions, I would ask that you guys sort of collectively, or however you want to break that up, give us sort of an overview of the program there at Vision Quest Morningstar Youth Academy. What is it and what do you do?
Well, good evening, and thank you so much for inviting us to be a part of this. Morningstar is a residential substance abuse facility for teenage boys from the ages of 13 to 18. We provide long-term and short-term services for them, services that include trauma-informed care, our substance abuse model 7 challenges, wellness, mental health services, and life skills. We also have an on-site licensed school. So we provide 7th through 12th grade and GED and pre-GED classes.
Okay, great.
We really feel like we have become an integral part of our community. So we partner with a lot of different partners, Midshore Meals Till Monday, Ironman, the local YMCA, American Legion, the Rotary, just to name a few, because we really feel it's important for our kids to give back to the community. At our program, along with our staff and kids, we also have 9 horses, 5 chickens, a rooster, and a duck. So you can imagine that there's absolutely no dull moment with us.
I would say not. So tell me a little bit about that community work. I see you guys out there, you volunteer with Ironman and stuff like that. What is it you're hoping to accomplish by having the kids out there in the community and doing these other activities?
Well, I mean, it's not just it's for our kids to give back. You know, some of our kids have taken away from their own communities, so it's time to be a part of ours. But also exposing our kids to different community members. Right. You know, particularly with Midshore Meals Till Monday, our boys are quite the favorite down there because they just, you know, they get an opportunity to build relationships with our family members. We are very frequently asked for when there are opportunities because the kids get so much out of it. They thoroughly enjoy being out and helping.
And it's also about really building pro-social skills because a lot of times back in their home environment, they aren't able to do community service and have positive influences that they make connections with. So to teach them the pro-social skills where they can be in any type of atmosphere and be able to survive, that's what's really important.
So Ashley, you mentioned their home environment. Where do these kids come to us from before they get to you down there in Wolford?
They come from all over the state. We are licensed through Department of Juvenile Services. All our referrals currently come from the Department of Juvenile Services. So those referrals come from any type of counties. Most of those counties are on the Western Shore, but we also get youth from Somerset County, Wacomico. We've had a few from Dorchester, Queen Anne's County, and all of those are referred through the Department of Juvenile Services.
Now, do all of these kids have substance abuse issues and that's why they come to you? Or is it just that they could be committed for any number of reasons or placed for any number of reasons, and some of them have these substance abuse challenges?
All of our youth have substance abuse challenges. Most of the time they are committed for other reasons, theft, assault, that sort of thing. But all of our youth do have substance abuse. That's part of the criteria. They have to meet criteria for ASAM level 2 substance abuse need.
But Bill, the interesting piece about our 7 challenges model is it's a decision-making model. So although we are talking about drugs and alcohol, it can be, we can have it to be life choices or choices in general. So it really is a great model for adolescents.
Yes.
Could you expand on that? I don't want to leave that, because I think that people would be interested to know a little more about the fact that you have sort of a treatment model, if you will, that you pursue down there.
So 7 challenges, as we said, I mean, it's an adolescent evidence-based model. We also pair that with our sanctuary model, which is trauma-informed care. So we are asking our kids when they first come in the door, the first challenge is to be open and honest. Some of our kids struggle with that. You know, some of our kids are ready to come in and they're open to treatment, but others think you're trying to trick them into giving up something that is important to them.
Right.
We also talk about what they liked about using drugs and alcohol. That's also a question that the kids think sometimes we're trying to trip them up, but they were using for a reason. You know, some of our kids, to be honest, or some kids like to get high, but the majority of our kids are masking some kind of trauma.
So I was going to ask you about that. Are there certain indicators or certain risk factors or certain things that cause someone to be more at risk for finding themselves in a substance abuse problem?
Well, of course, there's the biological component where, you know, some youth are just genetically predisposed through their parents or grandparents to addiction. But then whenever we look at trauma, a lot of these youth are doing substances to numb some sort of pain, numb some sort of feeling. When we look at trauma, we have to remember it's not only just the physical abuse, which a lot of people pay attention to, but neglect. Some of these youth, you know, they have theft charges, and it's simply because they don't know where their next meal is coming from, so they go out and steal. And a lot of times using substances, you know, mask that pain, basic needs that aren't being met, and having to learn to deal with those things.
Okay. So the goal here, I assume, is recovery, right? At some point, we want to get these kids to a place that's called recovery. Is there a different term that you use for that, or a certain descriptor that you have, sort of like a milestone or a benchmark for when you think that the treatment has been successful?
Well, our program is designed to be a four-phase program. Success is going to be defined by each kid individually. There's not a check and balance. There's not check a box and you're done. It's very much meeting our kids where they're at. Every kid's history is different. Every kid's trauma history is different. Every kid's substance abuse issue is different. And the reasons for them using are always different. So there's not a one size fits all to our program at all. It's very much individually driven, and it's very much individually progress driven. So what success would look like for one of our kids can be very different for the next.
Are you able to identify, or have you identified what you believe to be the most important components of a treatment program?
So what we found is providing a safe environment and a culture of care is paramount to a successful treatment program. As we've said, we encourage our kids to be open and honest and make it really clear when they come in the door that they can't fake it to make it. You know, we understand that we're not there to be the kids' friends. We're there to be strong, positive role models for them. We strive to be better than the adults that went before us. As we said, the 7 Challenges program is a decision-making model, and we ask kids to weigh up the costs and benefits to their drug and alcohol use. And we ask them to look at their responsibility and the responsibility of others in those choices. We're very fortunate that we have an amazing team that we work with who adore our kids and want them to strive to be the best they can and have the best positive future. I, for one, try to surround myself with better people than me in the hope that something rubs off.
Well, no question, you have great staff down there. So if we were to look at a successful recovery as maybe let's say we're in a kitchen and we were going to make something, and the end result was a successful recovery, and we were going to identify the ingredients to go in that. What would those ingredients be? What are the sort of the key factors that are necessary or often found in a successful recovery?
For our youth, because we work, like Emma said, we work with the 7 Challenges program, and it's really progress driven based on the individual youth, what goals they set, and if they've achieved that goals, what steps they've made towards the goals that they individually set is what we consider a success.
Okay. Now, success stories. I'm sure you have some. Are there any things that any kids, any stories that you'd like to talk about? Some kids who have done relatively well, not necessarily identifying any of the kids, but sort of experiences that you have seen that you've had with some of these kids and kids who have had really good outcomes.
Well, Ashley and I are fortunate in a place where there are many. How we measure success is a little bit different. We believe in taking kids out of their comfort zone and encouraging them to take a risk and do something different. We encourage them to set goals because we understand that the sense of accomplishment feels really good to them. Some of our youth come to us and don't strive or don't take education seriously, never think that they're going to graduate high school. So because of the success of our education system at our program, through their drive and encouragement, but also through our credit recovery, many of our kids are returning back to their home school, either in an age-appropriate grade or graduating high school or earning their GEDs. Many of our kids have gone on to join the military, gone on to a trade school or a vocational school, full-time employment, or college. I think one success story in particular that is close to Ashley and I's heart was a young man that we met back in 2016. We receive referrals on our kids, and as you can understand, what you see on paper sometimes is not what you get in person. So this particular young man looked horrific on paper. So when I went to meet him and interview him, I knew very, very quickly that this kid was destined for greatness and he just needed a chance. So this was a kid who had been exposed to an extreme history of trauma. His father had died of a heroin overdose, of which he was present when it happened. He was being raised by his great-grandmother, and his mother was in active addiction. So I think we all found each other at the right time, because he came to us. He was very open to everything we had to offer him. He actually extended his time in treatment so that he could obtain his GED. He then transitioned from us to Job Corps, of which he successfully completed that. So 4 years later, he's still in touch with us. He's always maintained full-time employment since then. He's worked on the relationship with his mom.
Stayed in recovery.
He stayed in recovery, and he just within the past few months had a little baby boy. So the nice thing for us, and I can speak to our entire team, is our kids keep in contact with us. So, and it's not just for the good times. It's not just to call and check in and say everything's great. Sometimes it's they're struggling and they just need someone to talk to, or they need a little bit of guidance, or they just need you to tell them what to do sometimes. But yeah, I mean, we're very, very proud of our kids. They work really hard. The success stories, I'm so glad to say we could probably sit here all night and talk about that. But yeah, I mean, kids who come in and work hard and make the changes that they need and transition successfully back into the community is really, what we're all about. So.
It's funny when you were talking about that one kid particularly. Somebody said to me once that everything happens for a reason, And sometimes it's very difficult to understand the reason. And as part of that, that includes bringing certain people together at certain times. And it's only down the road you realize that perhaps that wasn't chance. You guys found each other for a reason, and that you guys came to each other for that reason. So there was one word that popped out at me when you were talking, and that was the word hope. And I know we hadn't talked about this, but do you find that some of the kids who come to you were never really given hope in the beginning, that or it's something that just sort of vanished from their lives, and you find yourself in a situation where giving them hope may or may not be the goal, but that you end up showing them this whole world that's out there for them if they want to take advantage of it?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's just giving them something different, exposing them to different environments. It's like we talked about in the beginning with the volunteer work. It's asking the kids to take a chance or a risk, and they may be disappointed, but it may be part of a character building experience that they'll never forget. I mean, Ashley and I and the rest of our team get phone calls from kids who still talk about Ironman, and who they met and what athletes they saw and the Under Armour nun that they met, years ago. And those things stick with them. We do a lot of physical activity. We do triathlons. We do, our kids have done the Nanacoke triathlon. And those are experiences that our kids would never have had before. So it's not just watching athletes, it's becoming an athlete, which really, impacts the kids.
Right. You used a term, and I want to make sure I get it right a moment ago. Was that trauma-informed care?
Yes.
Could you sort of talk about what that is? Because sometimes these words mean something to us or to a provider, but to the average person, it may not necessarily make sense. Can you talk about what that is?
Well, I mean, our trauma-informed care model, it's really developing what we talked about earlier in terms of that culture of care. It's meaning what you say and not being mean when you say it. We're encouraging kids to verbalize feelings. We're encouraging them to, again, take responsibility for what is theirs, but understand that it's not their fault. We always phrase things of, it's not why the kids act the way they do, but what has happened to them that is why they're using the substances or how they lack coping skills. It's what's happened to them that you have to ask that question.
So it's almost like understanding why something happened so then you can figure out how to help it.
Yes.
Excellent. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think some of the most important things the community should know in terms of addiction and substance abuse as it relates to young people?
As it relates to young people, what they really need to understand is that, going back to kind of piggybacking off of what Emma said, we have to look at, not why are they acting the way they do, but what has happened to them to cause them to go into this downward spiral. A lot of the youth are dealing with some sort of hurt and pain that they really are looking to mask with the use of substances. So being able to have that listening ear, not blaming or naming or judging them at all, is what they really need. And once they build a specific level of trust with people, they will learn to open up and do positive things just by having positive role models that are there to support them.
Okay, so that question was really, what do we want the community to know about these kids? So the second part of that, if you will, is what can we ask the community to do to help either locally and our kids here or the kids that you have, or what would you ask the community to think about doing?
Well, I'll go back to even what you're talking about prevention, Bill. If you find youth that you may see that are more at risk or maybe more at risk, get them and, start the conversation. Make sure they're aware, have that open line of communication, because they may not have it at home. They may not have it really with any community resources. So start that dialogue with them so that they have that prevention and they have that information early on. As well as, if other youth are struggling, like I said, just not being judgmental and really being there just as a listening ear if that's what they need.
Oh, fantastic. So we're going to move on to our next segment. I'm going to ask you guys to stick around because we may come back and have some more conversation. We may have some questions for you. I'd like to thank you not only for appearing tonight, but also for what you do. I consider you guys to be neighbors, to be good neighbors. And I'm just so grateful for you personally, for the work that your facility does, the institution does. And, when we talk about giving these kids hope, it's a difficult time out there. And hearing you guys talk about your work and getting close to these kids and giving them hope, I just can't thank you enough. So with that, we're going to move on to Katie. Katie, again, you are from Midshore Behavioral Health, and I would ask you to sort of talk a little bit about you and the organization, if you don't mind.
Sure. Thank you, Bill. And thank you again for inviting me. My name is Katie Dilley. I am the executive director at Midshore Behavioral Health. Midshore Behavioral Health is not technically a formal treatment provider where we have individuals come in to have services rendered at our location per se, but we are actually, we have the responsibility of representing the 5 Midshore counties. So Dorchester County, of course, being one of them, Caroline County, Kent, Queen Anne's, and Talbot, as the core service agency, which is an extension in theory of the Behavioral Health Administration under the Maryland Department of Health here in Maryland. We have the responsibility of overseeing services for mental health and substance use in the Midshore region. We partner and work very collaboratively in concert with our Dorchester County Health Department Local Addictions Authority. So the leadership there, we have a team approach with making sure that we have adequate services for individuals in the community that are in need of mental health or behavioral health services, that we can support access to those services, as well as ensuring, if there is a gap in a need for a provider type or a service type, or how someone accesses services, whether it be transportation, or if there's financial barriers that are getting in the way of an individual having the opportunity to seek services, we certainly prioritize trying to fill those gaps. We're responsible for doing a lot of public awareness, education, engaging our stakeholders with not just ensuring that they're providing quality services, but also making sure that our services are communicating with one another and that we're bridging gaps with the resources that we currently have in the Midshore region. I will say that our agency, just because we are fundamentally responsible for 5 counties, we also oversee a lot of activity on the Eastern Shore for all 9 counties proper. So if you have any familiarity with our crisis response services, which I'll talk about a little bit more in detail as we move through this evening's discussion, we are responsible with overseeing that activity for the Eastern Shore, as well as the access to our Eastern Shore Operations Center, which is our resource and referral and crisis hotline for individuals that reside on the Eastern Shore.
Wow, that's quite a broad charge that you have there.
Yeah. We're busy.
Yeah, I don't want to say I got tired of listening to it, but it tired me hearing all of that. So, Katie, you may have heard me use the word stigma a few minutes ago. Can you talk for a moment about stigma in terms of how it's often associated with addiction, and more particularly how that impacts, or whether it does or how, the ability to provide services in the community?
Sure. Well, stigma, I think, has historically been and will continue to be probably one of the biggest challenges that we face with trying to ensure that folks access help and take that first step with, treating if they're having a substance use issue or a mental health need, or a family member or a loved one in need of support. I think stigma really drives personally the work that I try to do and support out of Midshore Behavioral Health, because figuring out different avenues to break down those walls of stigmas, I think, our everyday challenge. I love the Going Purple movement. I think that Going Purple, and we're now in the region, this is our 4th year of formally Going Purple as a Midshore region. we're doing the work right now. I mean, we're doing the work this evening with helping to bit by bit, kind of carve out the stigma that gets in the way of folks seeking that help. But, I think we have a lot of different, stigma can impact us differently. I mean, it could be, the fear of, a position that you hold in your job, or if you're affiliated with a certain, church group and you have certain responsibilities there, or just in your neighborhood or in your social group, and even just the fear of change and admitting that you may have some need to enhance your well-being and that you're ready to make some changes in your life. There's a lot of personal stigma with abandoning what support systems can look like for those folks that have naturally, been integrated with communities that are using substances. Just taking the step to move away from that social network, the fear in and of itself is extraordinary. I think our providers have done a nice job with trying to find avenues to make sure that the community here in Dorchester County is aware that services are available. But it's really networking and having supportive opportunities as a community to support and walk beside folks as they engage into treatment and take that first step is really what we're trying to do here this evening with just talking about it and assuring that, it is scary, but it's okay. There are a whole network of folks in our community that are here to help and be supportive. And I think just continuing to reassure the community that is the case, that there's actually strength with taking those steps to work on yourself and have an intentional look at how you could be living a healthier lifestyle.
Sure.
Is really essential.
I think that's one of those reasons that for two reasons, but one of the reasons I talk about how so many times people become addicted to opioids through, again, the lawfully prescribed medications or things like that. One is as a prevention measure, but also in terms of the stigma. Someone who is lawfully prescribed a medication and finds themselves addicted, should not be stigmatized. And as part of that, one of the things I like to say is that we as a society should make no assumptions about someone who presents themselves with these substance abuse issues, because you don't know how they got there, and it doesn't really matter how they got there. So I appreciate your comments there on stigma, because it really is a huge obstacle in doing this. So when a case does present, when a person does present, we understand that every person is different. Every circumstance is different. Their family structures, everything's different. But can you sort of walk us through how we maybe determine a recommended course of action for someone who presents with a substance abuse problem?
Sure. And I like to say, we do try as best as we can with opportunities like this to push out resources and access to help. But, when you're really in the throes of not knowing where to begin, it can be very overwhelming. And that feeling in and of itself can be inhibiting to access help. So one thing that I want to stress for our community is that we have a lot of no-cost resources that can help navigate how to enter help. Midshore Behavioral Health is one that is available to our community members to help support navigating and access the appropriate level of care that you may need, or just talking through, some options that the community may have for what service type would be most appropriate. But aside from Midshore Behavioral Health, we also have, and I mentioned it earlier, we have our Eastern Shore Operations Center, which is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week hotline that isn't just a crisis hotline for someone that might be in a real crisis that's, suicidal or really unstable and needing support from our mobile crisis teams to come out to the house to support them. But they're actually a resource and referral line that can, take information and point folks in the right direction to start accessing services or entering into substance use treatment. So the hotline number is 1-888-407-8018, and that is a 24/7 resource to anyone here in our community. It is specifically tuned into the resources of the Eastern Shore, which I think is a real compliment to our jurisdiction to have a number that's exclusively for the Eastern Shore, so we can get you pointed in the direction of resources that are right here in your backyard. It's also free. And if you're in need of an urgent care appointment where you may need to go in for a mental health or substance use assessment, they can navigate setting up that appointment. We have providers in all 9 counties of the Eastern Shore that can be available for an urgent care appointment. But they can also dispatch a mobile crisis team, which is comprised of a clinician, like a clinical social worker or a professional counselor, as well as our peer support network. We have peers that work on our mobile crisis teams. They're folks that have actually walked and been in recovery, walked through it, and they're on the other side to share their experience and really identify and be empathetic to someone in need of services. And they can come out to your home or wherever you are in that moment where you're ready to make that decision to be evaluated to get into services. And they can do an evaluation called an ASAM evaluation, which I know that Emma and Ashley mentioned earlier, that their ASAM criteria for their folks at their facility, but they can
What
actually—
is that, Katie? The ASAM.
What's the American Society for Addiction Medicine? They have a whole tiered evaluation of, how acute someone's need might be, and they can determine by, doing that short evaluation what level of care someone may need to go into. So it might be that someone could just benefit from having an outpatient referral, or someone may need to go inpatient and have detox services, withdrawal management at one of our facilities here on the Eastern Shore. So the mobile crisis teams can come out and support that evaluation.
I see. So as the old adage goes, you can lead a horse to water, can't make him drink. What do you do when you've got a family member with an addictions problem, and the rest of the family is desperate to try to seek out, obtain help for their loved one, but that loved one doesn't want it? What words would you offer in a circumstance like that?
Well, that's a really difficult circumstance, and I think it's one that is really, really challenging when you're sitting back and you as a family can identify that your loved one is in need and really needs to enter treatment, or we've talked about the horrible outcome of potentially seeing that their life is at stake because of their addiction, and you just never know if there's going to be an overdose or what are you going to come home to. All sorts of things that can go through your mind. But I think in addition to our crisis hotline, there's also a wonderful resource in the state of Maryland through the Maryland Coalition of Families. And they are a free service. They are grant funded with funds that are available here in the state of Maryland. And they are a peer-run network where they're folks that have provided or lived through, I should say, that very circumstance. They've been that family member, they've been the spouse, they've been the mom of someone with active addiction, and supported their family with moving through that and coming out with success stories, sometimes some really heart-wrenching situations that they've encountered along the way, but they are available to come and support the family. Even if the individual that needs the help isn't ready to do that, Maryland Coalition of Families can still be available for family support. And I know right now with COVID, we're doing a lot of innovative things with offering virtual support groups and access to tele services, and also coming into the home when it's needed and when it's appropriate to have supportive conversation, and even help with difficult conversations with someone in active addiction. So I can also share that phone number if that would be helpful.
Yeah, if you have it available, please.
I do. Maryland Coalition of Families can be reached at 410-730-8267. And there are support peer support specialists with that organization that live in each jurisdiction of the state of Maryland. And we are fortunate that we have a substance use peer support specialists and Maryland Coalition of Families team members, at least 3 of them that are working and residing right here on the Eastern Shore.
Okay. And I'll come back to you in a moment where I'm going to get those 2 numbers from you again. Let's talk COVID for a second. How has that pandemic affected your ability to offer services to our citizens?
Well, COVID was really, of course, all of us had to experience how to rapidly adapt to life in general. And I think it goes without saying, we're sort of mutually experiencing this trauma as a society. And I think we've seen a whole lot of emergence of need and very, very discouraging statistics that have come out. And I know you touched on that a little bit earlier in the presentation of just, the resurgence of substance use as a result of isolation and a lot of emerging mental health needs with depression, increase in suicidal ideation, folks revisiting, substance use that have been in recovery for years. So the challenge of the impact of COVID is one piece of it, but I have to compliment our provider network on the shore with just rapidly shifting their delivery of services to make sure that they didn't skip a beat. We had a few services that were a little bit more complex to figure out how to get back online. We did have, at one point in time, we had all of our residential treatment facilities for adults in need of, or that provide adult substance use treatment on the shore, were all closed for a few weeks there in the spring while they were figuring out how to manage keeping their consumers safe and their staff and navigating that. But all of our residential treatment providers are now back online on the Eastern Shore. But one thing that we've also been so blessed through technology to have is the availability of telehealth. And it's been interesting to see how I think our reach with getting folks, that stigma that we talked about earlier, there's a lot of stigma with just pulling your car up to a facility that that
Sure.
Everybody knows that that's where you go to get substance use treatment. And in a small community, the fear of someone seeing you when you get out of your car to go into that building, that barrier has just been eliminated through telehealth. And we're really looking forward to keeping telehealth as a mode of delivering services past, the state of emergency, and making it a much more accessible way to get help.
Right.
It's also assisted with our transportation barriers that we have that haven't changed, haven't gotten any better here in our rural community. But telehealth isn't necessarily for everybody. And I'm happy to report a lot of our providers are back doing face-to-face services in a COVID safe way with special precautions. But the resources have not gone away. They're a little bit more complicated just in terms of making sure we've got our ducks in a row, especially if you're needing to go inpatient, with how quickly we can screen whether or not someone has COVID or not. But our provider network has been sophisticated with overcoming those barriers. But I think the overarching concern that we have, and we've talked about this evening, is that we've got another wave of crisis right behind what's going on and actively happening in the face of COVID. And that's our behavioral health, the statistics, and what we're seeing, not just in our adult population, but in our youth as well, is very concerning. So we have to keep these conversations going and happening beyond the month of September too, because it's essential.
So as part of that, we don't want a person who has these issues or struggles to feel as though it's a death sentence or insurmountable problem. Can you talk about what success looks like and sort of the success that you see through your work?
Sure. And, thinking about this question, I will admit, I can't just say there's one or two success stories that I want to highlight, because there's just so many of them that I think I can speak to what I see on a daily basis, especially if you have the opportunity to engage with your peers that are working right here in Dorchester County. with our Dorchester County Health Department through our dry dock recovery drop-in center. All the staff that work there are all folks in recovery, and they inspire me every day to do my job better and to make sure that we're getting the word out that help and recovery is possible. Because they're professionals with lived experience that have been in some of the darkest places that you can find yourself when you're in active addiction.
Right.
And they have, through the support of services right here in the Eastern Shore and the Mid-Shore region, been able to move through periods of incarceration as a result of their addiction, homelessness, you name it. And they're back online, active in their communities, in their recovery communities, as well as employed full time to be available to share their own personal experiences and talk about how recovery is possible and help support our community members that are taking those first steps to get help. So our peer support network right here in Dorchester County is so active and so inspiring that I think that pocket of individuals really deserve, to be acknowledged as not only, a success and a real-time active success, but we've talked a lot about hope tonight. That's hope right there. They're doing it. They're working their recovery programs, and they're instilling hope in folks and supporting them every day professionally. So
that's fantastic. So to dovetail on that, what's the most important thing you would want the community to know about the battle we are facing in terms of substance abuse and addiction?
Well, I think I've touched on this a little bit, but the most important thing to understand is that recovery is possible, and it's scary. It's a lot of work. It's certainly a risk folks have to take to want that help, and sometimes folks are making that decision on their behalf, and we would hate for an individual to find themselves in that circumstance. But if you are in a place where you are able to make that decision independently, I think, to do what you can to find the strength to set the fear aside and realize that recovery is possible. And addiction is surging right now. Our heroin epidemic, like you said, our statistics in Dorchester County are really not good. And so we know there's a lot of people out there hurting right now. And I think if nothing else, just getting the message across that there are folks full-time, 24 hours a day available to help you and support you on your journey. And that a lot of us have been right there where you are, and it's possible. And that we're here for you, and our community is strong. And I think Going Purple is just a nice opportunity to revisit and recommit to supporting our community, but I don't want to see it stop here. So
fantastic. So I'm going to ask you, can you give out those two phone numbers again?
Sure. So our Eastern Shore Operations Center, which is a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week hotline, is available at 888-407-8018. And I also mentioned our Maryland Coalition of Families as a wonderful, valuable resource here on the shore and in the state of Maryland. And their phone number is 410-730-8267.
Fantastic. Thank you for that very helpful information, Katie. I want to jump to Emma and Ashley for a moment. And I want to ask you, do you have any advice based on your experience and what you see in talking to young people in terms of the best ways for young people to steer away or to help young people steer away from substance abuse issues?
The idea is to really keep them motivated and keep them with positive community supports and good role models. Role modeling is something that we see even in the program that makes a huge difference. So, if they have positive role models, they're involved in sports or dance or whatever it is that they enjoy doing, just keeping them on a positive path.
Mm-hmm.
And as part of that, and I want to ask you this, do you see barriers, or have you identified certain barriers for some individuals that prevent them from becoming successful in a treatment program?
I mean, it really is about willingness to change. I mean, I think the unique part of our program is we are not forcing kids to abstinence.
Right.
We're not forcing kids to see things our way. We are literally meeting them where they're at. So in terms of treatment, it really is up to them. We're providing a supportive environment, a place of, as we've said before, care and concern that encourages them to make better decisions.
Okay. Katie, I'm going to ask you the same question. Have you seen certain barriers to someone becoming successful in a program?
Let me think. Well, I think.
And you mentioned transportation a moment ago, and that's sort of what I was thinking about, because we have transportation challenges here on the shore.
Sure. I think transportation and also, housing can be an issue too. And where do you go long-term for, ongoing supportive services? I mean, there are barriers, but there's actually, been a real movement in trying to alleviate those barriers. So for individuals that have had concerns about transportation, several of our providers now will come actually and pick the consumer up or the client up in the community and transport them to treatment if needed. But we also have a growing recovery house movement here in Dorchester County and on the Eastern Shore. So, housing can be a real barrier because a lot of times folks can't necessarily return to where they were before they decided to start the journey of recovery. And that's totally understandable. We want to sustain successful plans that are going to lead to ongoing and committed long-term recovery. And so I think the barrier maybe is just kind of tied back to that fear and that worry that the resources that are just, when you peel back, well, I know I'm going to go get help, but what about my job?
Right.
What about getting there? What about the housing? All of the things that come into play after that naturally are barriers and inhibit folks with seeking help because there's a potential risk of losing a lot of those supports.
Yeah, you talk about housing. It's hard for treatment to be effective, I imagine, if someone doesn't know where they're going to lay their head down that night or where their next meal's coming from or how they would even get to a treatment provider. So that certainly makes sense. Emma and Ashley, I'll throw this out to either one of you. Are there certain signs based on your training and your education talking to kids that family members should be looking for if they think that perhaps they have a loved one suffering a substance abuse issue?
I mean, I think it goes back to engagement again. If you have a son or daughter who's been actively engaged in what we would consider a pro-social, whether it's a sport or a club, and then they start to withdraw from that group, or your own kids, so if there's a behavior change, you can look at again the withdrawing from what they are usually in a change of peer group.
So what would you recommend that they do? So maybe just talk to their kid and say, hey, I've noticed this is going on. Let's talk about that.
And it's really about having a conversation before the conversation is a problem.
Right. That makes perfect sense. So I tell you, that's probably be a great place for us to wrap this up because we're running out of time. Making sure people have what they need, paying attention to them, talking to them. I can't thank you guys enough for those insights. I want to thank our guests tonight for their time, their ongoing efforts on behalf of the community. And I'll say this, September is over, just about over. But just because it's over, we're no longer purple, doesn't mean the problem's going away. This is a 30-day awareness campaign that hopefully will have an impact throughout the year. We're hoping that you, as community members, as family members, will start having open and honest conversations with your family, friends, co-workers. Talk about these things, the risk of addiction. Talk to your kids. Talk to your kids if you think that they're off. We know our loved ones. We know when something isn't just quite right. And we just need to talk to them and ask them what's going on. And identify these problems, try to steer them into the resources that we know are out there and available to them. And hopefully hearing from some of our experts tonight will give you some guidance in doing that. I'd like to thank our sponsors again. Our sponsors have been fantastic at allowing us to have this conversation. I'd like to especially mention WHCP and Mike Starling for allowing us to do this and sponsoring us and putting this together. Julian Jackson, our senior intern out there, is the man behind the controls who's really pressing the buttons to make sure this comes across seamless. So I can't thank you enough for that, Julian. Bill Christopher, the Executive Director of the Chamber of Commerce. Bill, and that organization, Chamber of Commerce, I'm here to tell you, Dorchester Goes Purple, and everything you've seen doesn't happen without that organization. And Bill Christopher works tirelessly to do this. So I'd like to thank him as well. I'd like to thank Emma, Ashley, and Katie for spending time with us tonight. I would remind you that the next conversation is October 7th. It's a candidate forum for the Dorchester County Board of Education, led by the League of Women Voters. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and let's take care of each other. And through this, we'll be able to save some lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Okay.